On Tragedy, we cover cases that involve real people and real events. Episodes may include discussions of violence, criminal behavior, and loss. We share these stories to honor those impacted and to raise awareness, but they may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Tragedy, a true crime podcast. I'm Alyssa.
And I'm Michael.
And today we want to go back to several questions that we received from lots of different venues and avenues. And also we're going to go back to the questions from the listener roundtable.
That's right.
We didn't forget about those. But before we get into addressing some of the questions that we have received, we do want to remind people who are local to Crawfordville and Tallahassee that the annual vigil for the homicide of Jody Kilgore is coming up. It's going to be on October 6th. It's always on October 6th, and it is at the old courthouse starting at 6:30 and going until dusk, and that it's the old Wakulla County Courthouse, and it's on the intersection of Crawfordville Highway and Martin Luther King. And if you're not familiar with the area, the physical address is 23 High Drive. So please try to just stop by, meet the family, and let them know that we're supporting them. It's important.
And if you can't stop by, at least run by and honk your horn or wave out the window. Anything you can do to show some support.
Yes. So let's get into some of the questions that we have. And since we're talking about Jody Kilgore, we're going to start with some questions from there. So we had a question about why was Toby picking up Jody that day?
Okay. What we know about this is Jody had a DUI. I think it was 2 or 3 years earlier. And his blood alcohol content was double the legal limit, which is why there's so much time that's gone by, why he hasn't been able to get his driver's license. Now, when you think about, Toby himself, he couldn't operate in his business without Jody. Jody's the one who held the master license or certificate as a master electrician. And so therefore, he was kind of the keystone component of that business working. So that's one reason we end up with the routine of, 10, 10:30, 10:45, Toby picking up Jody so they could go to work, whether it was electrical business work or other type of work. That became the routine. That's what we expected. And that's how we kind of ended up with Jody's routine of getting picked up by Toby.
And our next question is a question about the relationship of Gladys to Susan and Jody's family.
Okay, yeah, we understand that the relationship was strained after the murder. Up to the murder, while they may not have been the closest of friends, there didn't seem to be a lot of friction that was talked about. And they was definitely visiting the family. There wasn't really any significant problems. After the murder, things degrade pretty significantly. And obviously, we can even see in the town hall where, Susan didn't participate in that. She also was not even happy that town hall was happening. She doesn't attend the vigils or anything like that. So there's definitely some strain. And we've heard even conversations about various challenges with talking to Gladys, things that have come up in phone calls. So obviously we have a significantly strained relationship after the murder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gladys is a very strong supporter of her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren. The strained relationship seems to really just focus on Susan as far as we can tell.
Yeah.
We also had a question, again, going back to the town hall. Captain Srirachi discussed some piece of evidence that was sent to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and our listeners wondering, have we heard anything about that since we did the episode on the town hall?
We haven't. And so that's been one of the things that we've really pressured Wakulla County Sheriff's Office on as well. There was a lot of conversation around evidence that was collected. There's conversations around how much money was spent on that evidence. But what we haven't heard is any results of that testing with FDLE and any outcome of that testing. Now, if it's part of an active investigation, I wouldn't expect to be told the substance of what that was, but I would expect to know that those results have come back and there was some kind of action that's happening as a result of having the evidence. We've heard none of this, and and neither has the family. They've heard none of that as well.
Yeah, this is kind of a continual thing that we come back to, is that we are trying to put into place more consistent communication from the sheriff's office. And because people feel like when you don't hear anything, you think nothing's going on. And I think just more consistent communication with them to the family, they might feel like somebody's doing something and someone cares, which is what
Yeah,
we're
I
trying to
mean,
do.
even in the world that I come from, and project management, I always let people know that no news is still news. And so, even with the time that's gone by, even with understanding that we have the belief that a lot of the evidence that picked up is just indicating people that were on scene. We've talked about it in previous episodes about how the scene wasn't secured very well and how evidence wasn't handled. We even have, conversations with Srirachi that talks about, the collection of evidence happening whenever he started the sheriff's office. It was kind of distributed. Again, I'm not looking to rehash that. We know that the scene wasn't handled well, and there's nothing we can't rewrite history, just like I've said in
Mm.
previous episodes. But at this point, we know that evidence was sent to the FDLE. We know it's been analyzed. It's been nearly 3 years plus, and we've heard no outcome of that at all, whether it was positive, negative, or whether we just have a giant list of fingerprints from all law enforcement officers that were on site.
Yeah, and this really leads well into our final question about Jody's case. And a listener asked about Iris. What is Iris? What do they do? So, one of our episodes, we reached out to Iris, and this is incident response and investigative strategies. And we spoke with Kathy Decker, who's the co founder of Iris, and Doug McGregor, who's a geo profiler. And what Iris is a organization that Kathy co founded just full of experts, geoprofilers. Kathy herself is a forensic examiner. She has a forensics examiner on file. She's a tracker as well. So I thought that was really interesting. And this organization has offered to support exactly what you're just talking about, any sort of investigation or analysis of any kind of evidence or anything that's connected to the case. And so that's the
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we've talked about this before, we have a dream team here of
mm,
various types of investigators when you think about it. And we understand that it's been 11 years. We've got the evidence, while not collected in the best way, while maybe not preserved in the best way and handled the best way. We have a dream team of investigators that's perfectly willing to look at it, and we would love for the sheriff's office to take advantage of this.
yeah. And the question was, what is Iris and how can I reach them? And so they can be reached there on LinkedIn,
That's
but
right.
also it is investigativestrategies.com. And they really, as we've said, focus on supporting um, unsolved cases.
That's right.
Yeah. So, anything else that I'm missing about Jody? Questions that we've had?
I don't think so, at
Okay.
least not up to this point.
Yeah, please.
We want more questions.
Yeah.
So, anything that we can, if you can glean from any of the episodes that you list on the Jody Kilgore case, anything you think we've missed, anything you want us to dig into, we are open, for questions, and we are open to investigate any of those aspects of those questions.
We really love those questions because what they do is they spark some conversation, and we'll have a conversation about a question and then come up with another question and then maybe something that we need to think about that we hadn't looked at before. So please keep sending us the questions. All right. So let's talk about Ian and some of the questions that we have around Ian Rogers' disappearance. A listener asked, so we had the interview with Joe, Ian's boss, and someone asked, why didn't Joe just call the house at the end of the day? Why did he go to the house to see if Ian was there?
Yeah, and that was a question we had as well, and I'm really glad someone asked it. We learned later that Joe didn't really live that far from where Teresa lived. So the question was, why did he go to his mom's house? Well, the reason he did that is because that was actually his address on record, his with Joe's company, and so therefore Joe was going to where he thought Ian lived. He didn't have this Kaylee address where he was living currently on file. So, and just like I said, it was pretty convenient. They don't live that far apart. And so it was very convenient for him to swing by. So he didn't go out of his way for this. He
Hmm.
was really just checking up on an employee.
And it wouldn't be unusual. I mean, some people would be like, why did their boss go to their house? You have to remember that Joe and Ian knew each other for a long time. So he's not just his boss. Like they've known each other for 20 plus years. Some people are like, I don't want my boss coming in. It was different, right? They had a good
Yeah,
relationship.
this is not a relationship. It was just, employee boss relationship. This was his friend. And don't forget, he had given Ian 3 attempts as a job with his organization at Spartan. And because of that, he looked at Ian beyond just employee. He looked at Ian from someone he was genuinely friends with. He wanted to see succeed.
Mhm.
And yeah, and he was just down the road. So swinging by, let's check on him. I haven't heard from him all day. I'm concerned.
Hmm.
That's how I took what Joe said.
And that's how Teresa then learned that Ian had not been to work all day, and then she filed the missing persons report.
Correct.
Yeah. So this is a question. I thought this was a great question that I don't know why we didn't think about it, but it's about devices, right? We know that in today's current world, and obviously, as an expert in technology, we can do a lot with people, where they are, where they've been, who they've been talking to by data mining their devices. And the question was, other than his primary cell phone, do we know anything about other devices that Ian may have used that might kind of help to figure out what happened that day?
The answer is, yeah. I mean, we learned that while he didn't have multiple cell phones, that was one of the questions. The way the person asked it,
Hmm.
he did have a tablet, and he did have a separate phone number through a WhatsApp application on his phone. Now we know all this information was handed over to the police. Oh, actually, wait a second. Was the actual tablet handed over to Wakulla County Sheriff's Office before or after the question? I think you know this.
Yeah, this is a really good question. And this is why listener questions are so important. So we reached out to Teresa and Kaylee both to find out about additional devices. And Teresa said, "Oh, you know what? Ian has a tablet, and I think I know where it is." So that is something that had not been turned over to the sheriff's office. And she said that she would go take that in. So that question has created possibly another device that can be used to try to figure out what happened to Ian that day.
Perfect. This is why those questions are so important.
Yeah. Um, Another question that we had, we know that Teresa talked when we very first spoke with her about how Ian would kind of just sort of go away for a little bit and maybe just take some time for himself. And the listener question is, did this happen frequently? So to answer this question, we again went to Teresa and to Kaylee. But let's talk about what does it mean to be a history? What does a history of taking off frequently mean?
Yeah, and that's when we read this question. I read it a few times, and I realized we need to define what history is. History of what? And so what we determined is, does he have a routine history of just taking off and not being around as on a regular basis? The answer is no, not really. Now, if you want to define history a little bit more loosely, and was he known occasionally to, disappear for a couple hours here and there? And was that part of his routine? According to Teresa, the answer is yes. That sometimes that she originally called it think time. And then the longer we worked on this investigation, she opened up a little bit more, and that she believed this is when some of the substance abuse was actually most likely occurring. And then we have a situation where, Ian had disappeared for a weekend with a friend, and, we're not sure the impact of that weekend or what was happening that weekend, but we know that he wasn't available. It was really irritating his girlfriend, Kaylee. And so she eventually got a hold of him. There's a big apology and everything, but, we were definitely led to believe that he'd gone away to most likely do drugs.
Yeah, and this happened the December before he went missing. So she described that as a pretty impactful. I would too. I mean, we're married, right? If you disappeared for 4 days and I was struggling to get a hold of you, I thought would be pretty impactful.
I'd be in trouble.
Yeah, at first, but then I would just be grateful that you were okay. So she did describe this as, super frustrating, and really it was bothersome to her. But to what we understand, that is the only time like a series of days disappearance
Right.
has occurred. So
That's why we found it so important. We needed to define what history meant.
Yeah.
Was this weekly, monthly? No, but there are instances in his history, quote history, that some strange things did happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So we talked about the truck, right? We feel pretty strongly that finding the truck is very important and can be a big marker in what happens with this case and what we end up finding out. And so people asked we talked a lot about, is the truck in the water? Talked to several agencies who have looked for the truck, can't really find it anywhere. So the question is around salvage yards. Have people checked salvage yards? This came out of our listener roundtable. And a follow-up question is, who can disappear a truck? Do we know people in the area who know how to just make a vehicle disappear?
Yeah, this is something we're going to start digging into a bit more. We haven't done a ton with this question yet. And the reason is because we weren't exactly sure where to start. Are there salvage yards, near and around the area? And the answer is yeah. I mean, there's definitely a number of them. And, have those salvage yards been checked? Looking for this truck in particular. That is a Wakulla County Sheriff's Office question. And as anyone who's been listening to this already knows, they're not really doing a great job of communicating with us. Now, has that communication improved over the last few weeks? The answer is yes. And so we're definitely going to target this as one of the questions that we're going to start talking to the investigators about to see what's happened here. And even if they don't necessarily share what's happened, at least put this idea in their head if it hasn't been looked at. Now, I would be surprised if they haven't already done this, because to me, again, when we heard this question, we were both like, well, we should have thought of that as well.
Mm.
So again, love the questions. So we're going to start reaching out to law enforcement regarding this type of investigation, see what's been done, and see if there's any progress that can be made. Now, to the other side of that question regarding, everyone knows this is chop shops, if anyone who's, watched any television at all when it comes to disappearing your car. And is it possible? Yes. The challenge is, where are those chop shops at? We're not involved in the underground aspect of car trafficking at this point. And so therefore, I have no idea. And I think that, I would assume law enforcement has some method of understanding this and understand who in the area could do it, if it is even someone in the area. That's something to think about as well. We know that, lots of different parts are serialized with VIN numbers and things like that. So you can't just take apart a car and sell it off like you used to be able to. But is it impossible? No. And if you start talking about the drug element associated with this case, would I make the assumption that people involved in that could also know people who ran chop shops and can disappear a car from? Yeah, I think that's not a huge leap to make.
Mm-hmm. And we know that there's that one sighting that's verified by the tag on the back of the truck. Let me just ask you a question. In Colorado, you have to have a tag on the front and the back. What are the rules in Florida? Do you have to have a tag on the front and the back of a truck?
No, just the back.
So something that I personally haven't considered, and maybe you have, the truck isn't spotted via the tag after that one truck spot. Is it possible that someone took the tag off the back of the truck and that's why it hasn't been spotted again?
I would say that's incredibly possible. And the reason being is you have to factor in a few things. This is a really common truck. We've already discussed this in previous episodes. It's a white contractor-like Dodge Ram.
Mm.
There's got to be thousands of these in the city. If you wanted to disappear that and at least drive it away, could you steal the tag off another vehicle and put it on this one and then drive out and never be scanned again as the Ian truck? Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I don't even think that'd be that difficult to do. I mean, considering the nature of the truck. I mean, if you had something more unique, finding something that matched would be, more of a challenge, probably take a little more planning.
Mm.
But if this was even a last minute thing, I've got to get this truck the hell out of here. There was probably 10 white trucks within 5 miles of where they were, if not more, that would have met the description.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And another thing that has just come up in the last couple of days, this is about the tools and the tools in the back of the truck. And I mean, I don't have a lot of tools. You have some tools, and there
Yeah.
seems to be, it's very typical for people to like etch or somehow put their initials on their tools. And so there was a question about, have those been followed up on? Do we know anything about what's going on with the tools that were in the back of the truck? We know he stopped by his mom's house, so they were his. Were they marked? Were they looked at?
Yeah, we reached out on this and we talked to Joe over at Spartan, and we asked about the ladders and whether he had done any kind of marking or etching on the ladders. And he had not, which is unfortunate because we were really hoping we had something with this question. We also reached out to Teresa to take a look at some of his tools that may have still been at her house. And she did find his initials on a number of things. One in particular she sent a picture of, but the problem with it is it's not an etching. It's actually just, looks like it's like he took a Sharpie and put his initials on it. That sounds great. It's nice that we have what that should look like. And one of the things we've talked about is potentially getting that image to the various pawn shops in the area to see if they have anything that matched. The issue I have is it was not etched. There's a reason whenever I've seen this with contractors, especially their more expensive tools, they'll etch their initials into something so you can't just wipe it off or clean it off. Since this was done with a Sharpie, it wouldn't take but just a few seconds to take that off with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, and then there's no more initials on there. So because of the lack of etching, it's unlikely we're going to find anything. But to me, it's still worth the effort to get that image out there because we might get lucky.
Mhm.
We may see someone in a pawn shop that recognizes those initials. And maybe in some situations, while what we saw was written on, maybe he did etch it on some things, and we'll get
Mhm.
lucky from that regard.
Yeah, because the image that we have, it's one of those things that you plug into the wall and then you plug your phone charger into it. I'm sure there's a real name for it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's so easily replaceable too. This is not the silver bullet I was expecting to find. It's a long shot at best, but I think the image, forget
Yeah.
how it was written and what was written on. I think maybe the image of how Ian wrote his initials may still provide some level of value from that perspective.
Yeah, I do really think it's an interesting avenue to take a look at because, we were talking, where's Ian? Where's the truck? Where are the ladders? Where are the tools? Where's all the things that were in the truck?
Right.
And there's a way to potentially rule some things out, I think. Some investigative options there that are open. And the last question we had, this also came from our round table. Um, this is more of a Wakulla County Sheriff's Office question. Who were the known drug dealers in the area, and what is the disposition of these people, and did they do any follow up on any of those kind of people who may have known something about Ian's disappearance?
Yeah, obviously we can't answer the question on the follow up. Because again, Wakulla County Sheriff's Office is not sharing that information, in my opinion, nor should they on that one, because that one could be a pretty prudent area to look at. So, but what we do know, what we can speak to is we've got two areas where Ian's path, or at least habits, crossed over known areas for drugs. And so we talk about the Tom Brown Park and the Connor Road, Appalachia Parkway area. That entire area lights up like a Christmas tree when you start looking at drug activity in the Tallahassee area. We also have numerous reports where there was a grocery store nearby near the Crawfordville area that have known meth, either a meth camp or meth activity around behind it, and that Ian was spotted in these areas occasionally. We don't know exactly what he's doing, but we can make an assumption based on what we know of his history. So therefore, while we don't have any names, we do have locations, and specifically those two that are confirmed, because we can put Ian, based on the evidence that we have and interviews we have, at both of those locations. So, but names, we don't have any names.
Yeah, I hear you. I think that's something that I don't want to know who those people are. So that seems like a good thing to stay away from. But it does go back to this communication piece. We did reach out to people who are close to Ian, and then when they say they don't know the answer to these questions, to some of these questions, then that just solidifies for me that there are some things that the Wakulla County Sheriff's Office could be doing, still preserving the investigation, but letting the family know that these are some things. Like, for example, hey, I had this idea about tools. Would be great if they would reach out and say, we had that idea as well. And we checked local pawn shops for ladders and things like that. We just don't know if any of those things happen.
That's right.
So were there any other questions that you can think of since we've been talking? Sometimes we come up with, that's the great thing about these conversations, is sometimes these conversations lead to something that we haven't really thought about.
No, the only other things I really had are just they're unanswered things. And so I think that just can take a little more time from us to formulate those questions in a way and start following up on those. Like, well, we mentioned it earlier. I really want to follow up on the junkyard idea. And I really want to follow up just in general on how and was that investigated in general? Because if we can find that it wasn't, it's an interesting avenue. And there's a number of, areas that could be looked at as a result that could yield a result.
Yeah. And, the true crime folks who are listening, when we think about abandoned cars in junkyards, that takes us to the making of a murderer, right? And so this isn't unprecedented. Finding a vehicle that may lead to a solution or a resolution of a case. It's happened before. So that's why, for me, I'm like, oh, this is plausible. We all know what happened if you watch that Netflix documentary. I feel like everyone did.
Yeah, but what you have to consider as well is how quickly did they find that? I felt like that was one of the very things that they looked at because, well, he owned a junkyard.
Right.
And so they're like, well, let's just check this guy's property. And sure enough, they go around to the back and there's the vehicle.
You're right. There was a much more direct link. That's accurate for sure. So those are most the questions that we had. We want to make sure that you know that we're listening to your questions. We're not just forging ahead and moving on. We are going back to these questions, and we are checking because of the nature of the work that we do. We are able to check with primary sources on
That's
these
right.
questions because we have built relationships with these families. And so we're not just like speculating, right? We are answering questions based on what the people who are best able to answer are telling us. And so before we sign off for today, we do want to put another call to action out there for the community. I'll start with the first one. Please remember everyone who's local to Crawfordville, Tallahassee area, October 6th, 6:30 at the old Wakulla Courthouse for the vigil anniversary of Jody's homicide. And then for law enforcement, we want to make sure that we continue to ask, please, Wakulla County Sheriff's Office, please reach out to these families. Please tell us, please tell them what you're doing, even like a monthly check-in with them, a phone call, whoever's leading the cases. Please just let them know you're working on it so they don't feel like they are forgotten and that these stories continue to stay at the front until they're solved.
All right. Well, thank you very much for listening.
You've been listening to Tragedy, a true crime podcast. Our purpose is to honor victims by sharing their stories through the voices of friends, family, and those whose lives were forever changed. If today's episode resonated with you, we encourage you to follow, leave a review, and share the podcast so these important stories continue to be heard. Together, we can preserve their memories and ensure their voices are never forgotten. If you have ideas for cases we should cover or questions about what you heard, you can connect with us through our Facebook group, Tragedy, a True Crime Podcast, on X @Tragedy Podcast, by email, tragedyaTrueCrimePodcast@gmail.com, or by visiting our website, www.tragedyaTrueCrimePodcast.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope you'll join us next time.